Hello everyone, welcome to today's session where we're going to discuss the topic History of English Novel. History of English Novel, this topic we are going to complete within 4 sessions. As today is the first session, so today we are going to discuss about the antecedents of the novel. Before I begin this specific topic, which is for today, the antecedents, the forerunners or the predecessor of this literary genre which we call novel, I would like to give you a brief outline or overview that what we are going to discuss in our next lectures, next 3 lectures. As you know now that in the first lecture we will discuss today the antecedents of the novel. In the subsequent lecture we will discuss about the definition and origin of novel itself and the rise of novel in the 18th century. As majority of the critics they attribute the 18th century when novel took birth. So rise of novel in the 18th century will be discussed in second session, and also the factors that influence the rise of the novel will also be discussed in the second lecture. And in the third lecture we will discuss about the pioneers of the novel, pioneers, the major prominent novelist of the 18th century will discuss, and also other important authors who also played their very important role in the growth, development and evolution of this literary genre novel. And in the last lecture we will discuss about the key features of 18th century novel and onwards. After 18th century, as 18th century novel, this term novel came to existence. Before that, what happened, that we will discuss today. From 18th century novel took birth. Okay, before 18th century what happened, that we will discuss today. And in the last lecture we'll discuss that after 18th century, when ideology changed, romantic era, Victorian, modern and postmodern, so many changes occurred in the history of English literature. Then what happened to novel, what kind of novel came to existence, which were in trend, which were in fashion at that time. So in this I can say specifically we'll discuss about the classes or the genres or kinds of novel. We'll discuss in detail in this fourth lecture itself. So this is a brief overview that we are going to discuss within 4 lectures. So let's begin today's topic, which is in which we are going to discuss about the forerunners of this literary genre novel. Now novel took its birth in 18th century. Well, it's okay, but what do you think? Was it happened that someone like Richardson or Fielding came to the stage and they announced that we are going to release a new form of literary style that is called novel? It एकदम से तो नहीं हो गया था ना कि एकदम से रिचर्डसन और फील्डिंग आए स्टेज पर इन 18th century, in the beginning of 18th century or in the middle, और उन्होंने कहा कि that we are going to start novel, we are going to start a very new fresh. Something happened before that played very important role, that paved the way for novel. So what kind of literary things, what kind of writings and creativities or innovations or experiments happened before 18th century, that the proper form which we see today, the modern day novel, came to its took shape or came to existence. So if we trace the history back, दिस लिटरेरी जोनरा, अगर हम इसकी हिस्ट्री को ट्रेस करते हैं, सो वी कैन स्टार्ट इट फ्रॉम 1612 BC when Epic of Gilgamesh was written. As you know that Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the oldest written literature, and from here we can start that this journey of novel also started. So now you will say that ma'am, novel is a prose work and epic is totally a long narrative poem, but it is narrative. So that is the catch, narrative. So something storytelling is going on, so that is our focus. So in all these things you will find that some are in verse, some are in prose. Verse which is written in some rhythm or rhyme scheme or specific meter, and prose which is not in a very simple language. अगर मैं कहूँ तो prose that is not in poetic form. So अभी you just focus over the origin of this or the things which contributed in the evolution of this novel. तो इस तरह से वर्ड्स और प्रोज में क्या चीज़ें लिखी गई. 1612 BC में Epic of Gilgamesh, which is one of the oldest written literature, And then Beowulf is also a long narrative poem, and the publication of which is also till now is a matter of contention among scholars, and the author itself is unknown. Author himself or herself is unknown. Then came Homer. Who lived in 700 or 800 BC. He was one of the most notable poets and also a literary pioneer who composed these great Greek poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. And with the creation of these epic poems, he established the proper form of epic and its subject matter. And then in 900 BC, so see the timeline. We are tracing back the history, that's why timeline is very important. Then in 900 BC, Roman poet Virgil came, who composed this work Aeneid, which became the model for John Milton's Paradise Lost. So this is something where some narration was going on, where these all are the narratives, verse narratives. Yes, they were written in verse form, in poetic form, but they are narratives. They are telling the stories. And what is the subject matter? That they are telling the stories of human encounters with monsters, or there is a protagonist whose heroic deeds are talked about in the story, and who is in the battlefield or in such situation. So these were the subject matters of these narrative verses. And then romances came. Romances, after the epic poems, romances came in, I can say they originated in France actually, in 12th century. In 12th century, romances came in vogue, in trend after epic poems. So it is a history of novel. That's why from epic poems, narrative took its shift to romances, where chivalric romance or medieval romance were being written. And it is called medieval romance because it was written somewhere between 1000 AD to 1450 AD, which is Middle Ages, which we call Middle Ages age. And why it is called chivalric romance? Because it is romances जो हैं वो stories हैं जहाँ पे chivalry है, which is related to bravery, where there is some knight or some warrior whose adventures and quests are being talked about. So here you can see that there is a deviation. Scholars or writers are deviating from the tradition of epic to the subject matter like chivalry, where bravery, honor, adventures and courtly love is being talked about, with these unique features of magic, I can say flavors of magic, spells and enchantments. So this is a change, this is a shift which we should notice here. After epic poems, there is a romances in the history of novel, and these were the romances. So here one more thing I want to tell you, that romances were not only written in verse form. That yes, earlier romances were written in verse form, but later romances were also written in prose form. For example, Malory's Maud Arthur. It is an English romance which was written in prose form about 1470. So writers were also trying their hand in writing stories in verse form as well as in prose form. Then Jeffery Chaucer, whose name we all know. So Jeffery Chaucer, he composed the Canterbury Tales, where he tried his hand both in verse and prose, as his Tales of Malibis, among all the 24 stories which he told in Canterbury Tales, the Tale of the Malibis and Parson's Tale are written in prose, and he also written a romance in Knight's Tale. So there is a prose, and in his long narrative poem Troilus and Cressida, he has actually introduced a kind of plot, and there is some conversation in dialogue form. So you keep in mind, dialogue form, there is a plot, some features of novel are coming into existence. So Toilers and Cassidy, Chaucer wrote something like in plot or in dialogue form. So in this way we can say that Chaucer, or it is said that Chaucer gave a new turn to fiction, because he earlier he also departed from a little from the typical theme which was being dealt in earlier type of writings like romances. He discussed, or he dealt with the themes like social and religious aspects of life in his Canterbury Tales, as we know. So this social and religious aspects of life was a little change in the dealing of subject matter, unlike the romances where only some knight or some warrior is fighting with some giant dragon or superhuman or supernatural thing in order to save some damsel in distress. So this was a little change where theme is theme has its deviation. And then Boccaccio. One more interesting fact I would like to tell you, that before Malory and Chaucer, it was Boccaccio. Before Chaucer and Malory, it was Boccaccio, who was an Italian author who already started writing in prose. In 1350, he already started. He was, so in this way, we can say he was the pioneer who actually started writing in prose even before Chaucer and Malory. It was with his writing prose tales of amorous adventure. He called it the Decameron, which he wrote. It was written in prose. So that is why Italy is also called home of the novel. And it is also said that Chaucer was much influenced by Boccaccio's style of storytelling. So this is also a very new interesting information, not new. And in this way, overall we can say that romances were very much in trend and vogue till 1600. Now why till 1600? See the timeline. Don't deviate or don't change your focus from timeline. It is very important because we are tracing the history. So romances till 1600. Actually after 1600 there were some writers who tried to mock or parody this serious literary form, serious literary matter which were being written in romances. So the new style of writing came to existence, which we call burlesque. After romances, it was also, burlesque is also a storytelling, but it was actually an imitation. बर्लेस्क का मीनिंग अगर हम देखें तो ये होता है कि इट इज़ अ मोकिंग और डिराइजिव राइटिंग ऑफ बाय some literary style by imitating it. So in this way burlesque came to existence. For instance, to make you more clear, there was a writer Cervantes who mocked romances by writing this story of Don Quixote. In his Don Quixote, what he did, that his hero is not saving some damsel in distress. His hero is actually fighting with windmills. Now why he is fighting with windmills? Because he sees windmills as giant, because knight is supposed to fight with giant or dragon. So here Don Quixote is fighting with the windmill because he finds that it is a giant. So it is which creates laughter and arouse humor in the readers. So along with the burlesque, there was one more new style of writing was also in the trend, which we call picaresque, and I hope you have heard this name, picaresque. And this word picaresque, if we go to the origin, then it was already in the fashion in 1544 in Spanish literature with the publication of Lazarillo de Tormes, whose writer is unknown, but this was so much in trend that picaresque writings or picaresque storytelling were so much in fashion, along with burlesque or even before that. So here I want to brief you with the origin of this word. This picaresque word has been taken from Spanish word picaro, which means a rogue or a scoundrel. That is why picaresque जो novel होते हैं, picaresque जो story होती है, in that there is always a rogue or scoundrel who goes on an adventure and leads his life by his wits. So that is the story of picaresque novel, and you have also heard the similar stories in Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn, or Saul Bellow, The Adventures of Augie March, who were actually influenced by picaresque novel. This element of adventure they took, or we can say they in element of adventure in their write-ups were affected by this picaresque trend. Then in 1688, come back to the timeline, 1600, we were till 1600 where? In 1600, romances were written. After 1600, burlesque, picaresque, and there were a little experiments and innovations. Now come to a straight timeline in British literature in England, where in 1688, Orinoco, or the history of the royal slave, was written by the female author Aphra Behn. Yes, the female author Aphra Behn wrote this short narrative prose. It was written in prose, it was a short narrative prose. But here one thing very innovative and experimental done by Aphra Behn was that the subject matter, unlike any romance or any encounter with monster, here Aphra Behn is depicting the truth of life. Actually, it is an attack on colonial problem of human slavery, degradation and suffering. So this was what Aphra Behn did in far before the rise of novel. And then in the similar time period, the contemporary of Aphra Behn, John Bunyan, also published Pilgrim's Progress in 1678 and The Life and Death of Mr. Badman in 1680. Which played a very significant role in the development, in the growth of novel. Because the story of this Pilgrim's Progress gave so many न्यू फीचर्स और कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स टू अ नरेशन. एक स्टोरी टेलिंग की जो आर्ट होती है उसको बहुत सी न्यू थिंग्स और न्यू पैराडाइम्स इसने दिए थे इस स्टोरी ने. पिलग्रिम्स प्रोग्रेस की जो स्टोरी है, इन ब्रीफली इफ आई टेल यू, देन पिलग्रिम्स प्रोग्रेस इज अ स्टोरी ऑफ और इज एन एलिगरी विच टेल्स द स्टोरी ऑफ अ character named Christian, and Christian is a character who takes or who undertakes a pilgrimage from his home city of which is home city कौन सी है उसकी, which is in destruction, the world, to the celestial city heaven. He undertakes a pilgrimage, and through his journey Bunyan has introduced all the necessary ingredients which we use while creating any novel. While writing any novel or while reading any novel, we encounter such very important elements we can be found in novel which were already which Bunyan has introduced in the late 17th century. अभी novel rise नहीं हुआ है, novel का birth नहीं हुआ है, but before then late 17th century बनियन ने ये लिखा था, जिसमें कि हम बिल्कुल वही एलिमेंट्स जैसे कि बिगिनिंग, कॉन्फ्लिक्ट, द राइज इन एक्शन, फॉल इन एक्शन एंड रेजोल्यूशन जो कि एक नॉवल में हमें मिलते हैं, दीज ऑल वर द पार्ट ऑफ बनियन स्टोरी. सो वी कैन से इट ही प्लेड अ वेरी सिग्निफिकेंट रोल इन दिस मैटर. So in this way, at the end of lecture, I hope you have got that at the dawn of 18th century, at the starting of 18th century, a very strong foundation was well established by its predecessors. So now I hope you have understood that how important it is to discuss about the forerunners of this literary genre rather than starting it from the 18th century when it took birth, it grew, it developed. How important it is to talk about the predecessors in terms of Bunyan, Ban, Chaucer, Malory, Cervantes, Boccaccio and so on, that how important role they played in paving the way to this literary genre which we read today so fondly, and it is a very glorious or we can say it is in its glory nowadays, as novel is one all-time favorite. And I also want to tell you that Bunyan's Pilgrim Progress was the best seller of its time, as we anybody could find it in every household, the copy of Pilgrim's Progress. So you can imagine that how popular it was. And then in 18th century, now we will discuss in the subsequent lecture about the origin or the definition of novel, its rise in 18th century, and so on. So this was for today. I hope you enjoyed the lecture, and I encourage you to read more about the predecessor and forerunners of novel. And thank you for today. We'll see you in the next lecture.